Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to the conversation. My name is Habib BOBAT, and inshallah we'll be together this hour. Today we are discussing a very important topic. Children are a source of mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They are a source of comfort for both parents, the husband and the wife, the mother and the father. And naturally, when you are part of somebody's life for so many years, when you do part, although it was an acrimonious process, the talaq and the divorce that took place between the two of you, you still want to be part of your child's life as a father. You still want to be part of the milestones. You still want to be part of all the achievements as they are progressing in life. Unfortunately, we find that many fathers are struggling. They are fighting long drawn out court battles to just get basic access to their children, to get basic rights, and to spend some quality time with their children. And we find that this is becoming an increasing problem in our society, where fathers are deprived oftentimes and they are not given the opportunity to be with their children. And today we are speaking to two experts, MashaAllah, Maulana Suleiman RAVAT, our programs manager at Radio Islam International, and also the drive time presenter of Sabah al-Muslim for a number of years. We've also got Maulana Ahmed AKOO, the teacher at Tartil al-Quran in Pietermaritzburg, and also an orator that travels the country, mashallah, far and wide to deliver lectures. Maulana, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. What should we keep in mind before we even get into this discussion today?
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to you, my Habib, and to Maulana Ahmed AKOO. I think the first thing we need to keep in mind is that this discussion revolves around what Allah wants, not what the ex-husband wants or the ex-wife wants or their respective families, not what society demands or not what the law demands. It's what Allah demands in the situation. The second very important thing we need to keep in mind, and this kind of applies almost always when you discuss marriage, it's not about scoring points. So today the topic is about rights of divorced fathers. Now, it must not be that whoever is watching the program say, oh, yes, but what about the men who do this wrong? And what about the ex-husbands who do that wrong? They are two separate discussions. When we talk about the rights of fathers, then we have to talk about the rights of fathers. And when we talk about the rights of mothers, you talk about the rights of mothers. So it shouldn't be a point-scoring thing. It's like when you do marital arbitration. You tell the husband something, you know, but if she didn't do this, why doesn't she do that? Let's avoid that kind of a mindset in terms of this discussion. And lastly, what the other party ought to do or ought not to do, they are accountable to Allah for that. What we have to do is what we are accountable to Allah for. We are humans. A divorce is not an easy thing. There's going to be a lot of emotion. There may be anger. There may be resentment. There may even be hatred. And you know what? It may even be justified. But as a Muslim, you have to manage your emotions to do what Allah wants in a situation and not what the dictates of your emotions and your nafs are.
It's very beautifully put there, Maulana. It's what Allah wants, and it's not about scoring points here. And at the end of the day, we are all accountable in the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Maulana Ahmed AKOO Sahab, they say for effective parenting, there requires effective communication. How can there be communication when one party is deliberately manipulating the other party by using the child in the middle? How can that child see the best of both sides when there isn't any communication because of this deliberate hindrance in the middle?
Maulana, I think just continuing from where Maulana left off about what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants, and this aspect of communication I think is absolutely critical. Often what we find unfolding in society, especially when a separation takes place between husband and wife, it's as if all communication is literally brought to an absolute halt, and if there is communication that happens to take place, then it's negative and it's like full of fury, and it's always going to build up to some sort of argument or some sort of fight. What happened to the fact that we've brought a child into the world together? You see, there's the aspect of husband and wife. That's a relationship and a bond that is shared between two individuals. But the moment a child comes into the equation, it's a totally different bond. It's now a common interest that both parties share. So we got to separate the two. One is the issues I've had with my spouse, whether it's the husband or the wife. That's on the one hand. On the other hand is the common interest that we both share with regards to the child that we've brought into this world, or the children that we've brought into this world. And I think if we just take a step back to reflect over that, then we'll come to realize that there's the type of communication where we would have been interacting with one another with regards to ourselves. That could be the problem area, or what perhaps contributed to the whole separation, and that can be cut off, and that doesn't need to be flourishing. But with regards to the communication regarding our common interest, and that is the child, that is something that has to be preserved. Now, what we find in society is that sometimes it becomes so estranged and there's absolutely zero communication. It's somebody phoning somebody else. Okay, can he come and see the child? Or can he do this for his child? Why does it ever have to be like that? And I think where we can eradicate that going forward, Maulana, firstly for those that are in the situation and perhaps are dealing with this challenge, for them, there's got to be a totally different method. But I think if you're ever on the brink of any separation, the first thing that you need to do is sort this out. That if we have to separate, what is going to be the position of our role as parents? Because we separating from each other as a husband and wife. You never separate from the fact of you being a mother or father of the child. The common interest is something totally different as opposed to our relationship as spouses.
Yes, always keeping in mind the common interests, and that is the children involved. And there's an African proverb that says when the two elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers. And very often it's the children that bear the brunt of all this, and they are in the middle, the innocent party. As adults, we can still deal with the trauma and the stress of the relationship with whatever mechanisms we have. But children are often left confused. They don't know what's happening. They latch onto every straw of hope that perhaps our mother and our father will work out something and tomorrow we'll be back together. But it just doesn't end up like that. Maulana, one of the arguments that are often brought up is that when you look at the roles of a mother and father, they say inherently a mother is a nurturer. Therefore, she has the role to fulfill and she is adequate enough to fulfill that role. She doesn't need the father in the child's life.
Absolutely not. Because if you look at the system that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala has designed, there is absolutely no doubt about the rank of the mother. We all know the hadith when Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, Ummuk, your mother, 3 times before he said your father. But the father doesn't just play a role in the child's life. The father plays a pivotal, a critical role. And this is the system designed by Allah. This is what Allah wants. So to build on from what Maulana has said, your nikah can terminate, but your parenthood can't terminate. And the child is an amana. Kullukum ra'in wa kullukum mas'ulun an ra'iyati. So even if you have gone your different ways in life, you've parted, you've divorced each other, but you are still collectively responsible for that child, and you will be accountable on the day of Qiyamah. Allah will take you to task, and that same child will take you to task. Sometimes parents get so caught up in their own anger and animosity towards each other when a marriage has gone south that they forget that that very child later on in life will hold it against you. And that's not to talk about what will happen on the day of Qiyamah when you have to account before Allah. We cannot and we should never underestimate the position that Islam has given to a father. And that's why it comes back to that point which I said in the introduction. It's not about scoring points. No, but the mother has a greater right. Or if you talk about rights of fathers, what about men who do that wrong? All the men who do whatever they do wrong, that's a discussion that needs to be had. And if it's not being had adequately, it should be had adequately. But right now, we are talking about the rights of fathers, and there are many men who are suffering, who are being intentionally and maliciously excluded from fulfilling the obligation which Allah has put on their shoulders. There are many children who are suffering because their mothers and the mother's side of the family have intentionally and maliciously removed the father's side from the equation. So you're not fulfilling your obligation towards your child as a mother by depriving them of the role of the father. And you're not fulfilling the haqq of the child. It is the haqq of the child for the father to play the role, because the door to Jannah is your father. And the father has many other virtues which time doesn't allow us to go into. So there's no such concept in Islam that the mother only plays a part and the mother is adequate. If circumstances prevail, the father passes on, something like that, there are other measures that come into place. But as long as the father is alive, the father has rights, he has responsibilities, that child has rights. And the mother needs to ensure that irrespective of what the father may have done to her, and irrespective of her emotions towards him, Allah wants the father to fulfill his role and the child to get the rights that are due to the child from the father.
Mullah Ahmed, sometimes it's the wife that's willing to accommodate for the father to be in the relationship even after the divorce. But it's the parents, like Maulana mentioned, it's the mother's side, the extended family, that intervenes and says, no more contact from this day onwards, and we're not going to allow you to come. They even take out a court order against the father if needs be. So sometimes it's the extension, the extended family that becomes the problem. But sometimes the mother is willing to accommodate the father.
Well, I think not sometimes, Maulana. That's also something that we find quite common in society. And with regards to that problem, that's a major, major issue. And what we don't realize, sometimes we think we're trying to help somebody else in their problem, but little do we realize we're causing such great damage, and we are doing something that's so detrimental to our own hereafter that I think very often we fail to even realize that, and that thought doesn't cross our mind. There's a famous incident, Maulana, of a story that we had a long time ago about a person who had a bear as a friend. Right, so the person had this bear as his friend, as his bodyguard, and the bear would ensure that no harm or no difficulty comes to the man. And one day this man sits beneath the shade of a tree and he decides to have a small nap. And as he's sleeping, a fly comes and sits on his head, and it's disturbing his sleep. So each time that it sits on the head of the person, then the bear just waves its hand and the fly moves away. But this happens repeatedly, and eventually the bear becomes so frustrated that it's now disturbing somebody that he's fond of and somebody that he's protecting. So when it sits on the head of the person, the bear, with all its might, gives the man, the fly, a hard shot, and that shot actually becomes fatal to the man. But what did the bear want to do? I wanted to just protect his sleep. I didn't want him to be disturbed, but you ended up taking his life. That's the reality. So we think we're protecting our daughter, we're protecting our child, and we're protecting our grandchild. Are you protecting them, or are you depriving someone else of their fundamental right that has been given to them by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Are you protecting your daughter at the expense of putting her hereafter and your hereafter in jeopardy? Is that what we're really doing? And I think we need to be wise, because the problem is we become too self-centered in these issues, and we become selfish. We become nasty people. I mean, we got to just say it as it is. We literally become nasty people. And just ask yourself one question: if you are in that situation and you're the one fighting to keep the father out of the life of this child, ask yourself, is Allah pleased with you? Would the Prophet ﷺ smile at you the day you stand before him on the day of Qiyamah, knowing very well that the Prophet ﷺ was an orphan? Who is an orphan? One who is deprived of a father by something beyond your capacity. It is the decision of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's something that we really need to ponder over.
What about poisoning the child's mind, Maulana? Using the opportunity to say, the reason why I'm not sending you to your father, you don't want to know what I went through. I know what kind of person your father is, and you don't want to be anywhere close to him. So sometimes we create this mindset for them, that it's for your protection. I'm doing it for your sake.
Well, history will bear testimony, and even the experts and the scholars that are involved in such cases will tell you, a man can be a bad husband but a very good father. Many times, even in a divorce scenario, the woman herself will acknowledge and say, he's a good father, but we've got issues. So divorce is something that happened even among Sahaba, but the men there were good men. So the one aspect that we've already highlighted, it's the right of the child. The child is, the father is the support, the father is the shadow. The second is, the father's rights do not fall away because of divorce. By poisoning the mind of the kid, you are now creating a situation where that kid will not fulfill the right of respect towards the father, the right of khidmah and service towards the father. What will happen to you on the day of Qiyamah? It reminds me of an incident of Hajjaj. Hajjaj was a great tyrant, a tyrant greater than any husband can be a tyrant. And one day after he had passed away, some people were sitting and they were bad-mouthing Hajjaj. Now, Hajjaj was a man who killed Sahaba. He spilled the noblest of blood. So one alim told them, listen, Allah will take Hajjaj to task for what he did. But you bad-mouthing him, Allah will take you to task for what you're doing. Your husband will be taken to task if he doesn't seek your forgiveness, he doesn't seek Allah's forgiveness if he treated you badly. But if you poison his child's mind against him, and that child then falls short in fulfilling the rights of the father, and that creates a context where the father cannot play the role which Allah has made it obligatory for him to play, then on the day of Qiyamah, he'll claim from you, and the child will claim from you. And there'll be no rands and cents like in a maintenance battle. They will take good deeds proportionate to the harm caused. And if your good deeds are depleted, they'll give you the evil deeds. Now think about it. If you poison a child's mind, and for 65 years thereafter the child does not respect their father, even after the father is gone, the child is only saying bad things about the father because that's the child was brought up in that way. How much of pain there will be for which you will have to compensate to that father and to that child on the day of Qiyamah. So it's our akhirat that's at stake here. I know there may be many of our mothers and sisters who are saying, but what about the men who abuse their wives or the men who do this? All of that is wrong. Are there more women suffering than men after a divorce? Perhaps. But that doesn't mean that we mustn't talk about the men that are suffering. And it doesn't mean that we must not highlight what are the rights and the responsibilities which Allah has given. So be very careful. You may be the victim after the divorce has taken place in terms of who was wrong and who was right in the marriage. But don't make yourself the perpetrator, the aggressor, and the oppressor by reacting in the wrong way. Even when Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was emotional, when he saw the mutilated body of his uncle Hamza radiallahu an, and in a state of emotion, he said certain things in terms of how he would take revenge. Immediately Allah put things into perspective. وَإِنْ عَاقَبْتُمْ فَعَاقِبُوا بِمِثْلِ مَا عُوقِبْتُمْ بِهِ. You can't overstep, O my Nabi. Irrespective of your emotions, a believer has to manage his or her emotions for the pleasure of Allah. Now, whether the father then appreciates it, whether the son or the daughter appreciates it, that's a bonus if they appreciate it. Even if they don't appreciate it, you have to answer to Allah. You will lie alone in your grave. You must be able to stand before Allah and say that, Allah, irrespective of what this man did to me, and irrespective of what were my emotions, I did what you wanted me to do, not what my emotions wanted me to do.
Mullah Ahmed, the father is often left at crossroads. If he takes up the legal route, he knows that a lot of money will be squandered. And he thinks to himself, maybe the same money can help my child. So he takes the same money and he gives it to the mother and uses it for maintenance. But he also at the same time forfeits the opportunity to access his child. So it's a battle that a father has to make, that he's fighting, and a choice that he has to take. If I get into a legal process, what will be the mental capacity of my child? What will he be going through or she will be going through? I don't want to put them through all the stress and trauma. It's not their time. It's their time to shine, for them to grow up in a carefree environment. Is it worth it for me to fight, or do I make the sacrifice of not seeing them, of having not access to them? So he's left at this very difficult position in life as to what to choose. How do you go about doing this?
Well, Maulana, firstly, that's an absolutely heartbreaking situation for one to find themselves in. To be in that situation is really absolutely emotional. And I've met many fathers who are in that position or have been in that position. And I often tell them that, listen, I understand what you're saying. And many a times it's justifiably to protect the mindset of the child, because the child is constantly being poisoned. And it's a tug-of-war of the emotion of the child that's constantly at play. So fathers, out of their extreme love for the child, would actually be willing to forego their rights and their access to the child. But actually, again, that boils down to the fact of, are we really doing something for the long-term benefit of the child? Because bottom line, that's your right, that's your child. You need to be nurturing that child. And I think as fathers, we need to exhaust every means possible, whether it's going to every scholar that we know of, or you know, when a person is desperate, Maulana, you're going to look for anything that's going to quench your thirst, and wherever you can get assistance, then you're going to turn to that route. And I think that should be done. We can't just simply leave it as a situation of, I'm protecting the mindset of my child and I don't want this war to escalate and this problem to continue, but I need to be in the life of my child. Not I need to be, I have to be in the life of my child, because that is his right, and obviously that is of benefit to the child, provided that obviously it's definitely going to be positive interaction with the child. But as a father, you got to continue fighting for the right of the child. It's not about you forgoing your right. You can't sacrifice what is the child's right for him to have his father in his life. And I think while we're speaking about that, Maulana, even a message out there to our mothers, we really need to be a lot more mature in these circumstances, and we need to look beyond our own personal petty issues and our own feelings, because the child is the amana that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with, and we got to do our best to fulfill that trust and that amana. You can't not be involved in what is your responsibility to protect that responsibility. It doesn't make sense.
Malana, what about exploiting the situation? The husband will say, Malana, when we were married, there was no swimming classes, no extracurricular activities. Now suddenly we are separated. I need money for swimming, for clothing, for X, Y, and Z, which we were not doing when we were married. So what about using this as an opportunity to exploit the situation?
No, that's incorrect. And at some stage, I mean, it can actually become where you're extracting somebody else's wealth in a haram way. Like with any other situation when it comes to money, there is that which is halal, then there is that which is makruh, and then that is which is haram. In some instances, it can reach a point where the amount that you're taking is not justified at all, and it's impermissible for you to take. Again, we must mention that there are many men who are not fulfilling their responsibility when it comes to maintenance. They're not doing what they're supposed to do. They playing games, not fulfilling the basics. And that is wrong. That stands condemned. But we don't always have to have the discussion both ways. Right now, we're talking about the rights of divorced fathers. So you have to, again, remind yourself that Allah is watching. Allah is watching. So whatever I'm going to ask for, I can argue it in a particular way. He can argue it in a particular way. His lawyer, his family, my lawyer, my family. But will I be able to stand before Allah on the day of Qiyamah and say, Allah, this which I asked for and I demanded, it was justified? Because Allah knows what is in our heart. Allah knows what is in our mind. I think what Maulana said is so apt. We just have to be mature. And there are good examples, we might mention this, where divorce took place. It was not an easy divorce. It was an acrimonious divorce. But both parents stepped up and said, listen, let's be mature about this for the sake of our kid. Because this is our greatest treasure, it is our greatest investment, it is our greatest joy. They communicate with each other, not via, directly with each other. They come to an understanding. They don't play this game, and this also sometimes happens, where each one tries to spoil the kid to turn them against the other. So the mother sees that the father is being a bit strict on a particular issue, then she gives in on that issue to try and pull the kid a little bit more to her, or vice versa. They move beyond that. They come to a common understanding and say, right, this is what it's going to be in terms of schooling, in terms of madrasa, in terms of discipline, in terms of what we allow, what we don't allow. Divorce is never ideal, and a kid whose parents has been divorced is not going to be in an ideal situation, but you need to make the most of it, and that can only happen if you are mature. And it can only happen if we keep the principles of Islam and Deen before us. If you're only going to look at legal principles and you're only going to look at societal norms, you will never be able to fulfill the right of that child, and you will not be able to fulfill the right of your ex-husband and the father, and neither will they be able to fulfill your right, because those rights are enshrined in our Deen. And it is the Deen which is designed by Allah, who has perfect knowledge, who gives us the ultimate guidelines in this regard.
Mulana Ahmed, ultimately, what role does the society play in all of this? How do we bring people closer? How do the both of the families interact with one another? What role do we play in this regard?
Maulana, before I go into that, just continuing a little from where Maulana left off, I think sometimes as parents, we fail to realize, or perhaps we know about it, but we just ignore that fact of sometimes how children can manipulate a situation. Now, just looking at what Maulana mentioned a few moments ago with regards to us sometimes trying to capitalize or perhaps score points with the child. So if the father has been strict on one aspect, I'll give in so that the child knows that mommy's more, softer with him, and mommy loves him more. But we don't realize sometimes how intelligent our children are. They look at that situation, and I assure you, they make the best of it, right? They know how to get their way. They know how to manipulate a situation to suit themselves. Now, we busy in our own emotional tug-of-war and we doing things for the wrong reasons. But little do you realize, what are you teaching the child? If that child is also going to manipulate that situation, and if we look at it in general, with life becoming so challenging and there's so many problems that society is facing, what are we really bringing into this world? What type of child are we bringing up? So that child is now manipulating a situation due to our negligence and our wrong. And tomorrow that child is going to enter into a marriage. Tomorrow that child is going to be a parent. Are we instilling the values that we're supposed to instill within a child? And I think we also need to discuss practical things. There's no such thing as your father is like this and your father is like that. No, that's your father. You have to respect him as Allah has ordained you to respect him. So I will never badmouth my ex-husband to my child. That's totally unacceptable. We got to spell that out. You cannot say your father is like this and your father is like that and he's not a good person, he's a bad person. You can't do those things. You got to tell the child that I am your mother, Jannah lies beneath my feet, but that is your father. He is the door to paradise, and you will respect him as he ought to be respected. We separated, the marriage is over, but that always is your father, as I am always your mother. But speaking about what role society plays in that, it's exactly the same thing. And more often than not, Maulana, what you will find is that a husband and wife manage to go through all the challenges that life threw at them, and they manage to stick together. They have stuck together through thick and thin, but then the marriage of your child gets dissolved. And looking at the fact that you saved yourself from that situation and now your child is facing a difficulty of separation, instead of helping it, we make it worse by us bringing about all this negativity. But we're actually supposed to be capitalizing more that, let's make the situation better than it is, not worse. All this animosity and all this negativity, where is it taking us as a society? Where is it taking us as an ummah? We worried about peace in the whole Muslim world. We can't make peace between two families or a couple that are separated. Society plays a very positive role or a very destructive role. It all depends which way or which direction we choose to head towards.
We can just pick up on that very quickly, Mahabib. I think this is where elders need to act like elders. Unfortunately, sometimes what happens is because the divorce becomes acrimonious, it almost becomes like two warring parties. It's two groups against each other now, and we need to prove the other side wrong. So the father and the grandfather, instead of guiding the daughter, will say, don't worry. We'll go and get you now the best lawyer. We'll teach him a lesson. We make sure he doesn't have visitation rights. We look for every technicality, that even when he has to have that time with the kid, that we make the time as short as possible. We make the kid, we pump up the kid in such a way that even the father comes there full of hope and expectation, and the kid gives the father a totally cold shoulder. That's wrong, because you again are committing a sin. That's the time when the elders need to say, okay, we understand you're angry. We understand maybe you even have resentment and hatred because of what the man did to you. But now let's look at the interests of the child. Let's look at what Islam says here. Let's make the best of a bad situation. And the more we have families doing this, then it sets a kind of a trend. It sets a kind of a benchmark in the society and community that divorces are part of life. But when it happens, this is how we're going to go about dealing with it. But when the family, immediate and extended, they roll up their sleeves also to join the battle, then it only makes the situation worse. Sometimes it's not the mother herself, but it's now because her parents and her siblings have all got, their arrow sharpened towards making life as difficult as possible for the opposite party, that she now just has to go along. Inevitably, what happens also is that the mother may settle down. The father may settle down. The respect needs to extend even to that particular point, that my child, you must respect your mother's husband. You must respect your father's wife. Because like Maulana said, we talk about unity, right? We want to see unity of the Muslims on the global level. We think it's going to happen on a macro level. It has to happen here. Every time there's a marriage, two families come together. And that is how marriage is the cornerstone of building an ummah. Because marriages bring families together, families build a community, the communities build a strong ummah. When divorce takes place, already that is compromised somewhat. Now, if divorce degenerates to a point where families become bitter enemies, where we draw in the whole congregation, if the fathers on both sides are musallis of the same masjid, we draw in all mutual friends, we draw in the neighbors, then we're weakening the ummah, we're weakening the community. How will we ever then prosper as an ummah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? So we need to do what is right for ourselves, for the kids, and for the broader community and society.
Mulana Ahmed, would it not be in the interest of the mother to share the custody with the father? In the sense that she's also working, she's got her own challenges that she as a lady is facing. On top of it, she's seeing to the kids. She would also want to do a break every weekend, every second day, whatever arrangement it is between her and the husband. Wouldn't it be in her interest to do so?
Most definitely so, Maulana, and that is the ideal situation, and that is how it's supposed to be. But unfortunately, the reality is so far from that we choose to make our lives so much more difficult and so much more challenging just to spite the other person, and that's the only reason why it's done. That I will make sure I can deprive you as much as I can just to get back at you because our marriage failed or because you were such a bad person as many times.
But is that making their life easy?
No, definitely not. We're prepared to take so much of difficulty on ourselves just because it now currently suits my purpose and my cause. But whereas in the ideal situation, if that whole responsibility is shared between both parents as it ought to be shared, both parties are definitely going to be happy because the father is going to feel fulfilled that he has the role, he has an important role in the life of his child, and the mother definitely has her break that she so rightly deserves as well, because parenthood is not just one party's responsibility. It's a common interest, as I mentioned quite early on in the program. This is a common interest that we share. Responsibilities are also supposed to be shared. It's not left to be burdened on one person. Neither is one person supposed to claim all the burden on their shoulder and then still not be happy after that.
Maran, in conclusion, what would be your closing remarks to the people that are watching at this moment?
I'll conclude with what I started, because I think that's pivotal. Irrespective of what the other party has done to you and how much wrong they may have perpetrated against you, there are certain things that you still need to do for them and for others. In this instance, towards your ex-husband and towards your child. And Allah will hold you to account for that. It's not about what people say. It's not about what the law says. It's not about what society says. It's about what Allah says. And my message to all women and to men when we talk about, the shortcomings there, but in the context of this discussion, to all women who are divorced, manage your emotions, overcome your hurt and pain for the sake of your child. Because your child's prosperity is your prosperity. Your child's happiness is your happiness. Your child's success is your success. And to try and avenge yourself, don't compromise your own happiness in this world, because later on the kid will hold it against you. And don't compromise your akhirat, because you lie alone in your own grave. Your father is not going to be there. Your lawyer is not going to be there. Your social worker is not going to be there. You will have to answer to Allah in terms of whether you did what Allah wants. So keep that in mind. In every situation, we are human. We are more tolerant, we are more accommodating towards someone we like. When it comes to someone we don't like, we are less tolerant, we are less accommodating. We like someone, we find excuses for them. We don't like someone, we find fault with them. That's natural human emotions and tendencies. But manage that for the sake of Allah, not for appreciation from anyone else. You'll see the benefit in this world, you'll see the reward in Akhirah.
Mullah Ahmed Saab, your concluding remarks today?
I think my concluding remarks would be something very important. And that is, since this program has been dedicated and primarily we're speaking about fathers going through a difficult time in the event of divorce, being deprived from access to their children. As a wife, as a female, the world always speaks about the special place that a female has for her father. There's always the relationship between mother and daughter that the world acknowledges and the world knows about. But there's this special link between a daughter and her father. They say a son is a son till he gets a wife, a daughter is a daughter for life. That's the common sentiment that is shared by the world. So as a mother, you know what your father means to you, and you know about that special bond between a father and a daughter, right? But in essence, it's a relationship between father and child. So like how you know what is the value of your relationship between you and your father, the same right your child deserves to have that relationship, to have that bond with their father. And it shouldn't be that I hold so dear to my heart my relationship with my father, but I'm depriving my child of that very same right. And by the same token, we can look at it comprehensively. If it's your daughter, you know how much your daughter means to you, right? And if it's your son also is going to have a female in their life, right? And that's going to be the daughter of someone else. So when we look at it from this aspect, I think that would be my concluding remarks. As a mother, I know what is my relationship with my father. Let me not deprive my child of that same love and that same bond.
It brings us to the end of our program, and we say Jazakallah khairan for watching. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fill our unions with khair and afiyah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it such that we are living by the sunnah. And as Maulana mentioned, and both our guests, that it's what Allah wants at the end of the day. We do it for the greater cause, for the sake of our children, for their prosperity, for their peace of mind, so that they can grow up in a carefree environment, even though that divorce has taken place. They can still succeed in life. They can still become confident individuals. They can still have a sense of belonging. They can still have a sense of security. But this can only happen when we both work hand in hand and we work for the greater interest of our children. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.